Kylo and Rey represented the first Star Wars pairing, not defined by lineage, prophecy, or generational duty. Their connection emerged from shared emotional fractures rather than inherited myth. The narrative positioned them as two individuals shaped by different forms of abandonment, creating a dynamic where power and vulnerability intersected in ways the franchise had never attempted. Instead of repeating the binary of hero versus villain, their bond introduced the possibility of two characters influencing each other through understanding rather than ideology. Their Force dyad introduced a level of intimacy unprecedented in the series. It allowed them to see beyond surface motivations and into the private spaces of memory and emotion. Unlike previous Force bonds, theirs did not require mentorship, destiny, or shared history. It functioned as a natural extension of their personalities. This created potential for a storyline where the Force operated less as a mystical mechanic and more as a bridge between two isolated individuals seeking identity. The dyad concept had the potential to redefine the central mythology. For the first time, the Force could have moved away from bloodline exclusivity and toward a relational framework. It offered an opportunity for Star Wars to reveal that strength did not arise from ancestry or hierarchy, but from emotional connection. Their bond could have challenged the Jedi and Sith dichotomy by presenting the Force as a medium for understanding rather than division. Their dynamic provided an emotional tension that no other relationship in the sequels matched. Their interactions shifted from confrontation to empathy, and back again with organic fluidity. Each encounter exposed a layer of both characters that could not be accessed through traditional mentor or villain structures. This made their scenes inherently compelling, because every exchange carried potential for alignment or divergence, creating narrative unpredictability. Rey's ability to see the possibility of Ben Solo created a thematic counterbalance to Kylo's perception of the darkness Rey tried to suppress. Their bond allowed them to confront parts of themselves through the other. This mirrored the thematic structure of duality, not as opposition but as reflection. The potential for shared growth existed on both sides, offering a path where redemption and temptation could coexist without undermining character integrity. Their complementary isolation made them narrative equals. Kylo was a fallen legacy seeking validation. Rey was a directionless survivor seeking belonging. Their arcs mirrored each other in form, but diverged in response. This structural symmetry set the stage for a trilogy where their personal journeys could have evolved in tandem, influencing each other's development while challenging the assumptions of light and dark. The throne room sequence revealed the fullest version of what their partnership could have become. Working together, without negotiation or instruction, they demonstrated synergy that transcended ideology. This scene showed a functional dyad capable of reshaping galactic power structures through cooperation rather than dominance. It was a glimpse into a narrative where they could have operated as a unified force, not through romance or rivalry but through mutual recognition. Their bond also offered a new lens for examining the Force. Instead of repeating patterns of chosen ones or ancient prophecies, their connection could have highlighted emotional resonance as the foundation of power. This narrative shift would have opened pathways for future stories focused on shared experience rather than genetic inheritance, broadening the mythology's scope beyond singular heroic bloodlines. Kylo and Rey had the potential to become the first protagonists who defied alignment categories. Rey had no institutional loyalty to the Jedi, and Kylo had no genuine ideological commitment to the Sith. Their neutral space offered room for philosophical evolution, where the rules of the Force could be challenged or rewritten from within the narrative, rather than through external exposition. They could have embodied a new era of Star Wars storytelling, where conflict was not defined by factions, but by internal struggle. Their shared trauma, mirrored insecurities, and overlapping searches for identity presented a foundation for a deeply human narrative. A trilogy centered on their evolving relationship could have explored themes of accountability, empathy, and transformation in ways the franchise rarely attempted. The dyad also presented the possibility of breaking the generational cycle that defined earlier trilogies. Instead of repeating ancestral mistakes, Kylo and Rey could have become agents of structural change. Their partnership could have addressed the failures of both Jedi and Sith systems, suggesting a new path where power was neither suppressed nor weaponized, but understood and integrated. Their emotional connection could have elevated the stakes of the trilogy beyond battles and political power. It offered potential for a narrative where the resolution of their internal conflicts determined the galaxy's fate. This structure would have made their personal growth the driving force of the story, rather than an accessory to external events. Kylo and Rey's dynamic represented an evolution in the franchise's approach to relationships. Instead of relying on traditional archetypes, their connection blended rivalry, empathy, resistance, and recognition. It was the kind of complexity capable of sustaining an entire trilogy without additional villains or extraneous plotlines. Their bond could have been the narrative spine of the sequel era. What they could have been was a reinvention of Star Wars mythology, a shift from inherited destiny to chosen identity. They were positioned as the first pair with the power to reshape the galaxy not through the destruction of one another, but through understanding. Their wasted potential came not from the characters themselves, but from a story unwilling to commit to the depth they represented. The trilogy treated Kylo and Rey's connection inconsistently, shifting its purpose with each director's interpretation. Instead of a cohesive emotional arc, their relationship became a structural casualty of creative direction changes. The initial groundwork provided in The Force Awakens evolved into thematic experimentation in The Last Jedi, only to be reconfigured into traditional narrative beats in The Rise of Skywalker. This inconsistency fractured the trajectory of their bond, preventing meaningful development. The sequels oscillated between multiple relational definitions without committing to any. At different points, Kylo and Rey were framed as adversaries, reflections, allies, and romantic interests. None of these identities were explored with enough depth to define the relationship. The lack of direction diluted the emotional stakes. Instead of a clear arc, their connection became narrative ambiguity, presented as complexity. Kylo's redemption was compressed into a narrow segment of the final film. After 2 movies of internal conflict and destructive behaviour, his transformation into Ben Solo occurred abruptly. The shift lacked the psychological progression necessary for audience investment. His redemption functioned as a plot requirement rather than a character resolution, reducing its impact and minimizing the emotional significance of the dyad. Rey's identity revision undermined the foundation of their connection. By transforming her from an anonymous scavenger into a Palpatine heir, the story shifted focus from relational development to lineage-driven justification. This change reintroduced the very bloodline dependency that their dynamic was positioned to challenge. It severed the thematic parallel between them and repositioned their bond as a narrative convenience rather than a meaningful arc. Their kiss in the final film served as an endpoint to a relationship that had not been given space to evolve. Instead of functioning as emotional culmination, it felt like an interpretive shortcut used to signal intimacy that the narrative had not earned. It framed their connection as romantic resolution, despite lacking the groundwork necessary for such a conclusion. Ben Solo's immediate death eliminated any possibility of exploring the consequences of his transformation. Instead of examining identity reconstruction, accountability, or reconciliation, the story closed his arc the moment it began. This decision removed narrative opportunities for shared growth and reduced his return to the light to a momentary gesture rather than a sustained journey. Rey's ending further diminished the dyad's significance. By choosing isolation as her final act and adopting a Skywalker identity, she symbolically distanced herself from the connection that defined her development throughout the trilogy. The narrative positioned her ending as independent triumph rather than shared resolution, reinforcing the disconnect created by the inconsistent handling of their relationship. The trilogy failed to utilize the dyad as a narrative engine. Instead of driving the plot, it became a background mechanic employed when convenient and ignored when not. The concept introduced unprecedented potential for Force exploration, yet the films treated it as a selective power-up rather than the philosophical shift it implied. The antagonistic structure of the sequels was undermined by the uncertainty surrounding their relationship. Because their motivations and alignment trajectories lacked clear direction, the emotional stakes remained unstable. The story oscillated between portraying them as threats to each other and portraying them as potential partners, preventing either arc from achieving full narrative weight. Their bond could have served as the central conflict of the sequel era, replacing external villains with internal complexities. Instead, the films reintroduce Palpatine as a universal antagonist, diverting attention from their emotional struggle. This decision shifted narrative focus away from the most compelling interpersonal dynamic in the trilogy and toward a recycled threat lacking personal resonance. Kylo and Rey's connection was ultimately treated as an accessory to plot mechanics rather than a foundational relationship. Their scenes often functioned as punctuation marks rather than structural pillars. This prevented the trilogy from exploring the psychological, ethical, and emotional implications of their bond, leaving their potential underdeveloped. The trilogy's refusal to commit to a singular thematic interpretation of their connection resulted in narrative fragmentation. Moments of profundity were followed by moments of narrative retreat, creating a dynamic where their strongest scenes felt isolated rather than cumulative. The relationship never gained momentum because the story consistently reset its meaning. Kylo and Rey were not wasted because the characters lacked depth, but because the narrative hesitated to follow the depth already present. Their dynamic offered a new direction for the franchise, one grounded in interpersonal tension, emotional vulnerability, and philosophical evolution. Instead, the trilogy reverted to structural familiarity, bypassing the opportunity to redefine the saga through their relationship. Ultimately, the story did not fail them through mischaracterization, but through indecision. The trilogy recognized their potential, but lacked the narrative conviction to build around it. Kylo and Rey could have become the emotional foundation of a new Star Wars era. Instead, they became artifacts of a direction the films were afraid to pursue. Their wasted potential remains one of the most significant missed opportunities in the franchise's history.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.